What about now? Yeah, I think that now it's on. Start with prayers. We start with Heart Sutra or with, all right. Well, can it go wrong if we start with the Heart Sutra? All right. Triple gem, here, one time, also at that time, the Bodhisattva looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those high aggregates also empty from then said this to the Bodhisattva, Sattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. Harshing and listening and village joined the wishes to practice making the perfection of wisdom. He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Sattva, Arya, said this to the Venerable Shariputra and the son of the village of the village wishes to practice the perfection. Correctly and repeatedly the holding those also emptiness is form, emptiness is not other than form, form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, composition, practice, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra likewise all phenomena are meaningless, without characteristics, unproduced, unceased, stillness, not without strength, not repetition, unfulfilled. Therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no composition of practice, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element and so on until including no light element, a nominal consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extension of ignorance, and so on, to including light extension of aging. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation of life. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, also no attainment. Therefore, because there is no attainment, there suffers a light the mind without obscuration, without fear. Having completely passed beyond error and reached the end point of mind. All the Buddhism in 3 times, also manifestly completely making unsurpassable perfect complete realizing the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantras, the mantra equal to the unequal, the mantra that fully pacifies all suffering, realizes all truth and is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Hayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasangate Bodhisattva. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, selfishly trained by perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration upon the Bodhisattva, Sattva, Arya, saying, well said, son of the village, who is not practice. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as would indicate even the doctor's rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken in the venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva, Sattva, Arya, those surrounding him their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, Asura, and others, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagavan. I prostrate to the gathering of the kings and the 3 chakras to the body, the holy order of beings expressed by the powers of their voice and multiple relations of after practitioners like my mother. By the teachings of 3, emphasizing the power of truth, children creditors.
May all negative forces opposed to Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of any thoughts and obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to Dharma. May all enjoyments be according to the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness here, right now.
Sangye chonan soke chonan na chanchu pali rani kyasuji dali chushengi bezona dolan penche sangye Sangye chonan soke chonan na chanchu pali rani kyasuji dali chushengi bezona dolan penche sangye Sangye chonan soke chonan na chanchu pali rani kyasuji dali chushengi bezona dolan penche sangye Thank Good morning, everyone. Yeah, sorry. Maybe I should also start my own recording. Yeah. That's a good idea. All right, you're good to go. Sorry? No, that's right. Thank you. Okay. And because it's somebody. So we're going to pick up from the point that we left off in a previous session. So first of all, looking at where we are in the text, we're not here. We are here. All right. So we're looking at the antidotes for attachment in the extensive explanation, on abandoning the attachment by knowing the disadvantages. We started to look at the way to abandon them, which cover 2.5 verses. So Geshe today began with reading from verse 16. So let's look at verse 16. Second. All right, verse 16. There it is. In the same way, a bee takes honey from a flower, I should take merely the purpose of Dharma and remain unfamiliar as though I've never seen all of them before.
sikki shologa chigge ani gyasi chemu shole and so ani sosu tabi doi that dom jugdam ditsu ani sudrang shagiro chago sabes yarum jujun namaya sodal doi that jugdam namaya and gindi song yoris that sikje chigyam do remu kanda chibare shasro.
Here in verse 16, the great Bodhisattva Shantideva draws from the Sutra of Liberation, of individual liberation, and provides us a summary with how one engages and restrained in the relationship with others. So it's not made too clear in this verse that here Shantideva is drawing from the Sutra, but His Holiness the Dalai Lama in his commentary says that it seems that here Shantideva is giving a summation of this Pratimoksha Sutra.
어디에서 당한 디 가르스나 디 아니 시추사디 아 단데 야스쇼쇼리 존죽 마송디 사드인데 다치 존죽 레위게바 아니 something 레우 마송디게 아니 직시 강을 주고요바 아니 율 칸다치고야 송고요바 디 아니 간지 샘래야 세우치 네바이나 까우까우야 테스치 아니
So keep in mind that here we're looking at the 8th chapter from Shantideva's Guide to Bodhisattva of Life, which teaches in a particular context. And the context needs to be understood. What is the underlying basis that Shantideva teaches this chapter on? What is the object that Shantideva is referring to? So without giving this chapter a context, Geshe reckons that some of the statements found in this chapter might feel a bit uncomfortable. Might give rise to a sense of malaise in our mind if we're unable to rightly contextualize this chapter.
So the anti galampai but and namjig dosanamdo so the teacher ya to shagich chagados ra.
In that sutra that His Holiness mentions, which is the Sutra of Individual Liberation, which seems to be the basis for verse 16, there are instructions that are given to Folio Den monks and Folio Den nuns, Gelongpas and Gelongmas. So this set of instructions is relevant to the instructions that are given for Folio Den monks.
These are the Yazoo Sholegi and it's two sagi shongi and it's Gelong Pai and it's Soterkin Dolia, Tubushawa. And it's so sig yulti, so Rajung de Yanchi and that's Gelung de Dindrichilaya, most Sungi of the and Yasha Gadan that touches 2 years Dean service.
So that being the case, when we contextualize the things that Shantideva says in the 8th chapter, in drawing from the Sutra of Individual Liberation for Folio Den monks, it seems that the target audience that Shantideva is addressing in these instructions is Folio Den monks. So first of all, monastics, but also Folio Den monks.
And Kariched Sungores Laundi, Kariched Sungores Laundi, so that something going to be touching guardian period, and it's Chinguin Doyer, and deal none touch and it let Tambo Olaya, touch it, and it Goba the change champions, and it Goba, Goba, touch it so, and it Chabi Chatos Goza, touch Chaban Goya. Let Tambo with Chapon Goyagi, Tabdi, and it's so soon.
So taking that into consideration, that the main audience for these instructions, as Shantideva is drawing from the sutra, is Folio Den monks, then for what end is Shantideva is giving them those instructions? Well, they're given, first of all, in the context of the 8th chapter, which teaches absorption. Now, the greatest obstacle for absorption is excitation. After all, mental laxity and mental excitation need to be stopped or need to be ceased in order to develop absorption. And the greatest fault is excitation. Now, excitation is associated with attachment, and therefore, this section of the chapter, Shantideva is giving here instructions on how to arrest attachment.
다 차유려야 아니 차유려야 무두고 공주로 써봐 아니 차유려야 님이 대신이 아니 내 당보위 차본 것들이 딘디지래도 딘자 아니 너희 인이 비기 소만 만신기 유일니 예원 내봐당 수제만 인지리 무기는 상황이 있어야 아니 즉 차바지 있어야지 유일 예원 내봐 아직 아니 만들려야 아니 수제만 인지리 지금 다시 아니 로든지 어딘지 이게 마음부 상황이 아니 그 란슈 그때는 차바지 온 거래 차바슈지 뭐지 아니 차바지 상황이 되지 괜히 간지 수름 소마도로 써봐 아니 상된 거 맞고요 그 상황으로 들리지는 거야 아니 유일의 다른 얘기야 유진 소디 아니 유기 비다 모두 보고지 아니 유기 가서다 민팀이 쳐서는 모두 말레 비차기 또 게임 비차 쌈 거예요 가지 말레 비차 게임 비차 같이 쌈도 뒤쪽에 아니 먼저 내 담보 얘기 아니 차바지야지 용도 그래서 딘딩 또 슈 첨부 쓴 거서 그래서
So then when this set of instructions is given for monastics who are beginners in their monastic life, or for the fully ordained who are also, relatively speaking, new in their life as fully ordained monastics, what the main emphasis is placed on is the guarding of ethical discipline. So beginners need to guard their ethical discipline. They need to put a stop to all those conditions which are adverse to guarding ethical discipline. Such as, for example, attachment. Attachment is considered to be an adverse condition, an adversity that makes it hard to guard ethical discipline. So therefore, instructions are given for such beginners, practitioners, who say that they should view the faults of attachment. They should view the faults of the objects of attachment. They should think of the unattractive aspects of the objects that they're attached to in order to reduce that sense of attachment. And it is in line with what Vasubandhu said in his presentation of the treasure of knowledge, in which when he spoke about how afflictions arise in our mind, he said that they arise because of being in close proximity to the objects of the afflictions, but also through paying an incorrect mental attention to those objects. So the combination of staying in close proximity to the objects of the afflictions and paying an incorrect mental attention to them, afflictions arise. So therefore, what Shantideva says here, it says that if such afflictive states of mind arise, you will have no ethics. Also, you will not be able to develop absorption within this context of the 8th chapter, which teaches how to develop meditative absorption. So therefore, instructions that are given for such beginners monastics is, first of all, to stay far from those objects that trigger the afflictions, to trigger attachment and so forth. Not only that, but also to see the faults in those objects, to think of the unwholesome aspects of those objects. So it does work in that way, that if you see the faults in such objects, if you remind yourself of the aspects of the object which are not wholesome, then bit by bit attachment will abate. It will lose its power and will weaken. So particularly here, Shantideva is putting an emphasis on reducing the attachment that one has to certain objects, the objects of attachment.
these are calculated. Any the caso Lug cha, and it took Shucham Jedia. How do you make you challenge? And it took Mazan, and it so should Jedia, and it doja that is Gamon pie on the cheba. The answer, and it let Tambu, and it Gamon on the chimney. Sungi over deep. Jasajatama is 16 deep coloring, 2 feet Jasadi, Sonium Landry Kalia, and it's only with dancing number 19, Rogo Son de and Sonium Landry Kimberley was raw, and Rajon Jerry over Jasajatama was raw.
So then when we contextualize the way that Shantideva teaches here this 8th chapter, you need to keep in mind that it's teaching it to fully ordained monastics. That was the target audience of those teachings, not only fully ordained monastics, but fully ordained monks. So therefore, when you look at the instructions that Shantideva gives here, which are aiming at reducing a sense of attachment, it says that at certain point in time, you need to remind yourself of the unattractive aspects of the object, such as, for example, if you're attached to another person or to the body of another person, then you need to remind yourself of the uncleanliness of that body. So you meditate on the unclean aspects of the body. For a fully ordained monk, if you develop a sense of attachment to desire to a woman, for example, then in a particular context, you could meditate on the unattractive aspects or the unclean aspects of the body of another person in order to reduce that sense of attachment. So when Shantideva says here in verse 16, it says, in the same way a bee takes honey from a flower, I should take merely the purpose of the Dhamma and remain unfamiliar as though I've never seen all of them before. In drawing from that sutra of individual liberation, it is said that when monastics go on alms, well, the people that go on alms are monastics rather than lay practitioners, right? So when they go on alms, then they take what is offered to them and continue to move on, just like a honey collects bee and kind of, a bee collects honey and and moves on, without remaining attached. So in that way, also fully ordained monks should, if they're receiving alms, they should receive those alms and move on without remaining attached.
And it's just a calculate pig, that's Mudugan, number sort of similar chamber in D, and it never does, the never subject shoot. And never subject shoot. And give them a dozorgi, and it chanchu sem, one the tani pay. And to give young to counting that is Amazon, and it didn't changes and nothing jiggy and jiggy, Kolon Maras. In the Angan Yandang jig, and jig somebody chill do some sort of trouble D and kill Montanevale and non son bread, nations and on Tampo the Villa, Sabza Shuchi. And it Niangue, vacation, precious.
So in that context, Shantideva is teaching a group of male monastics in order to a way of reducing a sense of attachment. Now, when you read through this chapter, then sometimes you need to change it, to change the way that Shantideva speaks here in order to suit your particular disposition. So, for example, if you're a nun and you also need to reduce the sense of attachment that you might have to another person, then you would do it in the same way that Shantideva explains here, just in working out the gender differences or kind of suit it or tailor it to your particular disposition. Otherwise, if you don't think about the context that in which Shantideva gave those teachings, it might give rise to those ideas that Shantideva here is teaching through gender discrimination, or developing other sense of discriminative approaches to his teaching. That could happen if you don't contextualize the teachings that Shantideva gave here. So you do need to work out to change those teachings according to your particular disposition. If you're a nun, or if you're a woman that is using the set of instructions, so you will make amendments. You will use it in order to reduce your own sense of attachment. Otherwise, if you then think that those instructions were given a particular way because this text is discriminating against women, well, someone that has developed bodhicitta, that has internalized bodhicitta in their own mind, will not have discriminatory approaches to others. They in no way are going to discriminate based on gender, ethnicity, and so forth. And if you do claim that someone that has developed bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, is still discriminating against others, well, it is a faulty way of thinking, which for you just will result in miserable states in the future. So it's really important to make sure that we go the next step, rather than just looking at the words that Shantideva expresses here, and also give them a context, and then according to that, work those instructions out in the way that will suit our particular disposition.
Dinesha, Dinza, then Bina Kawaya Pin Kapsananda, and Kawasang Kawaya, Gelong Le Tambo, so, and she kept down to Jenny Sansu, Chin Pivioras, then a Sojun Dune Vaji, and a Dom Todd, and a combine some jig sal ha, and it can tell me because it is. Madichi, Suzugu, and Langaran, then Joanna, and it's Dramada Miglaya, Marsha D, and it D Ganchin, you D Ganchin, Samlea, Chabakia D, Nyon Doras, Tinjitsun Jenny, and it's Salsa Chinny, that February, such as Suzu Vilayachi, and it Lola, you didn't have it, one the Tani, can't come to tell me. Ne Soder Domadi, and it can't tell you that Major Samsung, Ding Kevach Giovanna, young qualified which Rocha mother, Chetan Lipe, and it Tatan Sunjan is substitution growers, and whom we touch it, then get on to him by now, and it Susan Namzadina, and it and Ponze the Kenny, and it Kasi saying, who could you shadows, and it 가서 람가 비게 독사리 양지 지 가서 다지 선진 비게 독주제 세월다지 간지 소소래야 년가태서기 때문에 키다지 아니 그다라 소바 딘지기 년가여서래 카주디 켄드네 비게 아니 겹쳐거라서 간지 딘지기 체도 아니 카지 생기 케도스 아니 본제디 켄 제마 카야 메친 and Genos dos Pevidos. That Nozeki, we save on the Missy Town, the same Lusadi, and Suzupa Pejuchi, Timadochi, and a Yamata, Theodore, the Dindi Kaya Mevachin, and it Kanji Pongwe, dance the Lambanon chin. One time the paper was at his rock.
During eons of fortune, good eons, it is said that when monastics practice in being very strict about the ethical discipline, certain instructions were given with respect to how they proceed, for example, when they walk along the road. So it is said that, for example, when they move from one place to the next, when they walk, they should look only 2 or 3 steps ahead rather than kind of looking at everything around them. gazing on everything around them, and also coming across objects of attachment that could otherwise give rise to attachment. When they proceed along the road, they should make sure that they do not look everywhere, but just focus on the road, maybe 2 or 3 steps in front of them, and proceed. Also, in terms of the things that monastic use when they travel, that was a time of old, or you can say also during Egudians, when monastics keep their ethical discipline intact and become very strict about the monastic discipline, then the only possessions that they take along with them is a set of robes, a begging bowl, and a staff. So the begging bowl is, of course, for receiving alms, and the staff is to protect themselves in case they're being attacked by, you can say, wild animals or dogs or what have you. So just to ward them off. So, of course, this staff is not used for any other things, not to inflict harm upon others, but to ward off certain dangers. So those are the things that monastics should have if they travel from one place to another. And as they walk, rather than looking everywhere, they should only look at what's happening in front of them. And of course, when you get to the point where your mind, you've reached a certain confidence in your mind where you know that objects of attachment will not steer you or will not sway you away, that attachment will not take control, then you can relax a bit that mode of ethical discipline and you can look everywhere. But at the time in which your mind is still controlled by attachment, those strict rules were stipulated for monastics. So it is in line then with this sutra that His Holiness mentions in his commentary that says, just like a bee collects honey from a flower and moves on without being attached to the flower, so do we should proceed with our necessities.
Dance kora lenchini, any drayamado, Tikalayaji, any meadow, Kadola Soba, any Trilla Soba, Chayagi, any Song Korayamara, the Damalia. But then Anshin Chichin, that Nandu say Longo, say Sago, Lutra, sell Tangore, and Suzulan Piggy, any Tawata Chin, that Kanji Pangochin, Devanza. 아니 세 생기자 농고가 세 농가 드르 카둘이야지 그 세 땡인기 아니 진다긴 조르와리 아니 진다리 더 딘딜이야 차대야 많이 봐세 디니모 세 티치데 라우 달라로 아니 세 디세진다 아니 강아야 마차봐 아니 소소소 라네야 로고야디 딱 기치슈리로 아니 디차바이나 딱 디겐진드니 아니 피게 Lobotusum, Pomasampi, Kanji Gomdru Yamnelea, Nejimato, Suzuki, Labalea, Nejimato, and then Paya Zoni Nevaiza, and Jami Dantanamanashi, Drogo said, Tirenda, that's all on the Rajon Solea, Labjaresha Sirati.
So in the same way that a bee collects honey without stopping on the flower or alighting on the flower and being completely engrossed with the colors or smells and so forth, it collects honey and continues on. Similarly, when those instructions are given for monastics to practice meditation or accomplish a certain meditation practice, it is said that they receive alms. For example, they receive food once a day, but they should proceed on to the place of practice and continue the trainings, continue the meditation practice without remaining attached to patrons, to sponsors and so forth, just like a bee collects honey and moves on. So if you do remain attached, then it undermines your meditation practice. It undermines your practice. It gives you no benefit, but actually your practice is damaged by that sense of attachment. So again, keep in mind that when we contextualize these instructions, those instructions were given by Shantideva to those fully ordained ones who remained in seclusion or in isolation, practicing a meditation practice or practicing their training. So here in this part of the text of the training, it is said that this is the attitude that you should have in order to reduce the sense of attachment. Now, looking at the commentary of Gyatso Dhammarinchen to this section, it says, as childish ordinary individuals have not produced one's purpose and one also does not become meaningful for them, one should retreat far away into isolation. When occasionally meeting them, first make them happy through joy, but then do not become greatly familiar. Act well without attachment or anger, like an ordinary person just pointing the way. Although one goes for the begging round into the town, like the bee that takes the honey from the flower without being attached to its color and so on, while being there physically, take only robes and food for the purpose of the Dhamma. Abide without involvement in the distractions and treat all people as if not having seen them before.
chi ningur sola chakpa pangbala nis yujin ki nyeba tang yujin nyeba tambu yujin ki nyeba la ni ngarye ki nyemi tang chabi nyemi tambu ngarye ki nyemi nis.
So we've looked at in the section of the method for developing the antidote to those things which are not conducive with calm abiding. We looked at the inner aspect, abandoning attachment to sentient beings. Let's look at the other aspect, which is abandoning attachment to gain and honor. There are two sections to that, the subject's fault and the object's faults. When we begin with the object's fault, let's look at the disadvantages of pride and then the disadvantages of attachment.
Mambu leongi any core mambu roach ningun yenda chita on dindi mambu zone that pe any match shooting some sort chimbu mekanga gawachi ton chigito any bo pugudo that in some tang harge kia tan ninga pe or and dami nyema kurtichi dala mambu gawashi tendi nyeva changyo shiu all the jigwakis.
Looking at the disadvantages of pride, if you become attached to gain and honor, in thinking that I now have a great code, I have many followers, I have a great audience, I have a great reputation, people give me offerings and so forth, this sense of pride is detrimental. So looking at the disadvantages of pride in verse 17, it says, I have many possessions as well as honor, and many people like me. Nurturing conceit in this way, I shall be made terrified after death.
Nansung kia jig mato bigi shemba kan yo mares. Tinzata ngagir kini hento zao ni yo marsumada.
Looking at the disadvantages of pride, with strong pride, our first of all death process will be affected by it. It might give rise to a greater degree of fear going through the process of death. And after death, on account of pride, we will continue on to take a miserable state of rebirth. So in that sense, pride gives us no benefit, it's only a fault.
Dinza dangan big yungora tapena ngada ngada wala ya soso la ya kaya mech ya ro soso la kaya mech ya pigita sangi chu kading tamba give singing chu kading deni anchi pigi sangi chomden de chu chu gi ramba kaya ba dipa chi ani mela lenki ngi soroch takkaw kola ya ani che tuksana ta chigyoras tinjila deni anchi mi ani gawacheya da ani chi kanji ani nyengol shabdo chingi ta yonsigiras kansin di yongya di pena nga rojla ya gawachini yungu meba ani pi sanji uchu kona la teni sanji uchu sam ra chu sambo labsha sambo di ngal chi rama samni phugu yori ani kurgu yori gawachigire mato bege shemba khaya maras di ni inje matuna ani ngarge sambadi yajigadam ki gores ra dini e chitubana bena ngadaji bana ngala ngagi kesagi jikoran hayo maras ra pi lomba khukyo mazan tharja penjo khaya mengi oditi jilaya kesagi ani medelaya ngagi kesagi jisiki mandos tayina ya ke shembi togi di sozu bigya dautro sonche tinji drobaina ani ngagi ki jichago asare.
So Geshe said that looking at how he thinks about it in relation to himself, well, it has nothing actually to become proud of. Whatever experiences now, it is due to the kindness of his spiritual teachers. It is due to the Dhamma, the kindness of the Dhamma. And here he's passing on the instructions and the teachings that he received from his teachers. So in passing on those teachings that he got from others, it might be that some people respect him, some people give him gain and honor and so forth, but it's not about his personal qualities, rather that from the viewpoint of having received those instructions before, and the Dhamma has good qualities, has excellent qualities, passing it on to others, people appreciate those qualities. So Geshe said it's not about him, it's about the precious Dhamma. So people appreciate the good Dhamma. People appreciate the good advice. And therefore, when you think about it in this way, you have no basis for the development of pride. Particularly, Geshe said that thinking of his background, being born in a poor area, poor country, being born into a family of nomads, having a life that for the most part was bereft of possessions or had very little possession, wealth, and so forth. It's not that he has a good basis for becoming proud. So then when you think of your own personal situations and you find that when you give instructions and when you pass on the Dhamma teachings to others, people respect you or give you offering and so forth, you should think that it's not about you, it's because people like the instructions. People appreciate the Dhamma. It's a good way of reducing that sense of pride.
And if nation but that's the magic, the matter of the quality. Tedo, Kasim could don't polish not so sure. Kunzo Hans and the quest somebody couldn't knowledge go to Sanje. And could you shaba? You know, and he said, Lady, going on the national government slave or this or Kansana, Nanzu, Piggy, Shade, and it's Sanji Chu. Someday, Sanji Chu, or did you let them that's me gauching your battery? Because of Hashana, Manzolia gauch is a good that the sugar hagmaras, or did you eat Matubaina, Betty and the non to show younger shoot?
There's this common story that is told probably in amongst Tibetans. Geshe doesn't know if this story works here, but let's try it out. So there was a guy that had quite a lot of sores and pimples on his face, to the point in which his face became quite scary. So he went into a restaurant one day. There were a few ladies sitting in the restaurant, and they were sneaking quite a lot of stares at him, kind of, because his face was pretty scary. But because they were looking at him all the time, he thought that they really liked him. So he gave someone a letter, a note to pass on to those women wanting to create a contact, and receive an answer and said that, no, sorry, we are totally disinterested. So when we feel that we do get the attention of others, for example, when we share the Dharma with them, rather than becoming proud about it, thinking that there is something really special about us and because of that people like us, then think that it's not about me, it's because people appreciate the Dharma. People hold the Dharma in high esteem, and use that as a way of preventing yourself from becoming proud.
간지 류가 차와 아니 신주로 쓰고라다 간지 메기위 차와지마도 기위 차와 제트고 말 디 제벌야다 아니 동한용야 남송이야 직바기야 아니 타만디고 용야지마도 자원이니요 말이스 제자 갑두이네야 아니 지 대차다 나게 생기기 빵고야지레스 라.
And therefore, there's no point in pride or attachment. There are erroneous states of mind. And because of those erroneous states of mind, we act physically or verbally in a way that is erroneous as well. Under the influence of those afflictive states of mind, we do not cultivate virtue. We do not act in a virtuous way. And as such, the result of that will be only suffering and fear and miserable states of rebirth. And things will not work out for us. And therefore, attachment and anger are to be abandoned. The commentary says, one says, I have a lot of gain and praise and I'm very popular with others. If one holds such arrogance and conceit, one will go to the lower realms due to the faults of pride and attachment, and one will generate fear after death.
David number Mombix, Kandan Kanla Chagiba, Tedan Tedon, Don Yurtu, Dongan Yurtin Gushin Dan, David Keba Namacha, Chabalin Jibodis.
Now, the next section is the disadvantages of attachment as part of the subject's fault. Let's look at the next 6 lines. It begins with verse 18 that says, so, thoroughly confused mind by the combination of whatever attachments to this and that, multiplying into thousands, sufferings will ensue and arise. Hence, the wise should not be attached. Fear is produced from attachment.
아니 몸비기 레데니 강강의 차기버스 송원한지 기차버스다 차배기 통줄디 아니 통원 난신기 준매버디 아니 차배기시기 로코랑 아니 몸비기 상원쟁이 몸비기 아니 몸비 왕비 차관 된거여서 아니 차비기 육 내로 제다와신데 통금해봐 아니 신주로 통구여봐디 육하는 돈다 두비어라서
The immediately preceding condition for attachment is confusion. It is ignorance. Which means that when we look at the way that attachment acts, it is attached to something that does not exist in the way that it appears to the mind. So there's a certain appearance that dawns to the mind, but the object of attachment does not exist in that way. So due to this confusion, due to this ignorance, the mind becomes attached. So it doesn't see reality the way that it is. Not only doesn't see reality the way that it is, also it adheres or it apprehends reality in a distorted way. And therefore here Shantideva says, one should not remain attached.
레다 디컬이야 아주다지 콜렌 투기할 체들로 먼저 고등 용약 체들 패시 디 뉴스잖아 약사레스 단다 지간이 쇼로가 쪽게바 디게 아니 착비 규 착비 몽 아니 착비 제부숨디 다땡구도 아서라 비 넘버 몽비 익세디 아니 착비 규레스 규 딘디지 라테니 아니 간다 차게 봐서야지 그 수시만이 봐 일을 잡았는데 어디 아니 차비기 넘바 드레스 디 제블 카리 무슨 동아 용해 되게 아니 동아 다지 아니 동길 왕부 아니 동아를 줘야지 아니 차비 데브레스.
Looking at verse 18, verse 18 gives us a description of attachment from the viewpoint of the cause, the nature, and the result. So it says, so thoroughly confused mind. This is the cause of attachment, a thoroughly confused mind. The nature of attachment is that it is involved with an incorrect mental attention that is paid to the object of attachment. By the combination of whatever attachment to this and that, right? So that's by the combination of whatever attachments to this and that indicates the nature of attachment, an incorrect mental attention that is paid to the object. The result of attachment is multiplying into 1,000 sufferings will ensue and arise.
Devi kebi chagmejas chagwalini jiba kes laundita gunzen dindi jimbanzas ani keba namju chen sogi bi da yug nelu ani shingin sogi ani chabaki mares kanzina chabaki na gyu dungamado jibaki amado nevanza ani kebi gi ani chabo magi bachigres.
And therefore Shantideva says that the skill, the wise, knowing the results of attachment, in that suffering will multiply, will become thousands full of suffering because of attachment, they do not become attached.
Devenas pembi lela number mobi kyo yul kanda chakbara yurwa chinyepa teta te dongbawe tongyur jeba dungan yudin gyujin dangwa. Devena lando la kebi nyingkul la chaba mejadi chaba lena ngandol jiba kibi chero.
Hence, a mind that is deluded with regards to projecting karma to however many objects one becomes attached to and is separated from, if they are summed up, it will add up to 1,000-fold results in sufferings. Therefore, by being skillful in what has to be abandoned and adopted, one should not generate attachment to gain in praise. Due to attachment, one will generate the fear that is the lower realms. Sorry.
Yes. 어디에서다 간지 동로디 로 아니 비 오늘 타내기 랑돌기 신이 레니 신이 비게 데두기 균제 신이 몬청인 속이 아니 닝골라 차가 말았어. 로 간선은 닝골라 차바이나 아니 중제라야 경험마도 센데다 심마 칸이야 아니 경험마도 매바인자 아니 닝골라 차가 말았어. 단 남주 닝골라 차야지 수수라 닝골 신이 좀 봐는데 시오지 비길이야 아니 짜치무 지냐다 디지 모송데 디 아니 디 뭔지 마송 와는 지 경험라도 살삼삼도 아니 딘지 초래거라 당한줄라 데 베드 노르교 로 데 베드 노르교 다 노르교 힘바는 당한 르타마도 가르스나 난좀 뭐 쉬지 다랑 차고 쉬지와 다랑 게 제마도 견제신 가야 말했어 난도 르탄 샤바이나 아니 깨워 땡긴도 뭐 주기다 자와지 수르도 왔으라
The last line in the commentary should probably better read. Due to attachment, one will generate the fear of proceeding to the lower realms rather than the fear that is the lower realm, the fear that of proceeding or going to the lower realms. So, if one is knowledgeable of what is to be taken up and what needs to be cast aside, if one is knowledgeable about suffering and happiness, if one understands what reality is, one does not become attached. If one understands areas of karma, actions, and the result, attachment would not arise. When one is knowledgeable about all these topics, and also one understands the way that the object of attachment exists, they will know that attachment will bring them no benefit in this life, nor will it give them benefit in future lifetimes. And therefore, when we look at the way that we react to gain and honor, if we find that we have strong grasping at gain and honor, and if we do not get what we want, if we are not respected or if we are not honored, if we do not get the gain that we seek, we feel that we are at fault, we should know that this is a big mistake that arises due to confusion. It is a big mistake that arises due to ignorance and attachment. Let's look at the second section in the point that explains abandoning attachment to gain and honor. Now, the second point explains the object's fault. Now, the object here is the object of attachment. So, what is the fault in the object of attachment? The fault in the object of attachment is that it is unreliable. So the first point says objects of desire are not reliable. And the second point says there is neither benefit nor harm in praise and belittling. The next 6 lines in this chapter say, family understand well that it is the nature of these things to be discarded. Although I may have many possessions, be famous and well spoken of, I do not know where the collection of possessions and renown will go.
Chavaki Yulaya, and Zudatoro Yanga, Yungaros, and Dinza, and the Zobiliachi, and it Chabigi, Tevaman Shingi, and it Yigden Pevachi, and it Yorwesna, Zawanini Meva, and it T. Ranjin did that bit, and it Kajini Banipe, and it Gudre, Guvi Ranji, he must Dinza, Tabatem Zawini Mevach, and it rubbed Tortugris.
Family understand well that it is the nature of these things. These things is referring to the objects of attachment. So the nature of these objects of attachment is to be discarded. So those objects of attachment are not reliable things. Looking at the things that we are attached to, object of the senses, for example, forms and smells and taste and tactilities and flavors and so forth, all those different things that we attach to are not permanent. They change from moment to moment. They disintegrate from moment to moment. So with a sense of attachment, we adhere to them, we grasp at them as if there's something that we can rely upon. There's some stability that we can rely upon. But this is not the nature of those objects because they do change from moment to moment. They disintegrate from moment to moment.
And charge, and chagora, that the zoetic, and it's our in Taba Temple Jimeba, and Pilia, and Yilangigoris, Yilangigoris, Taba Temple Meba.
And also others that we're attached to, our friends and relatives and so forth. We get attached to them, and yet they also are not permanent. They also change from moment to moment. They have no stability.
Rather, Tabatempo Mevadi, GP, said, and the talk Tomu said, the Zula Soba, and Tabatempo Meva Caresana could seek Tomezam, sick Jordan, Namgud Dandan Sutoni, and Tomo Mayimba, the huge Magas Chetigway, Gudred, the Pemon Yugas, the Yugoras, is the Tabatempo Mevadi on some which Tamana. And Lamsan talk to it. Young pig that and it's the total moment which is divina, negro gipig, and it Ningola soba, in the Chabala soba, and the Yona young, and the Zolaya is down in your mothers. The Zotic Canala, Ningo Yanda, the Lonjo, Candace by the Canan and pig that chewing in Modelia, Kanya, and you then pair that any kid to get nevers.
Even with our friends and relatives, even with them, we can see that they are also impermanent and not stable. Looking at people that are close to your heart, your friends and so forth, sometimes it's enough with just one sentence or one word that is being spoken, and those relationships change. From friends, they become enemies. From someone that you like, they become someone that you dislike. It's enough for one slight thing to happen, either verbally or physically, for some relationships to change. And therefore, they are permanent, they are not stable. So that occurs to us while we're alive, but also upon death, we will be separated from all of them. So also, they are not permanent. They are not stable in a sense that after death, when we're separated from them, all of them in some sense will be discarded or will be set aside, and we will proceed completely alone. And therefore, what is the point of becoming attached to gain and honor and possessions and so forth if, first of all, the nature is not permanent, it is not stable, and at some point, inevitably, you will be separated from them.
아니 난상물로 이게 정부 전체 시험이나 담부 기온이 아니 지구진 기어라서 지구진 기를 모두 비리에 기비기 비 많이 기비 거야 동화 잡고 수치용 기들 거야 동화 용으로 징에 로바 징에 수감해 봤어 타마 치료디야 수간지 아니 간지냠 레투 메바스 로 진짜 계란 수면 비르나야 안치 비르야 계란 체도 직속 단계 생에 그 단계 생에 그 계란냠도 메제 간자 기게 생에 비디 용구여다 그조이나야 이데 쇼요만 치위니 모델이야 수치고 줘야 됐어 근데 소소 치고 줘야 갈도라야 아니 치고 줘야 갈도라야 소소 곧 템바치 제리 바나 단단님 아니 샤피 샤운드 만들어 그 우유 내줄이야 저 아니 게틱 방은 수지 제와야 단단님 전고 그랬어
We are born alone. When we're not only we are born alone, also we die alone. So when we are born in our mother's womb, we are born alone in a sense that the suffering and the struggles that we go to in being in our mother's womb when we develop as babies are things that we have no companions that we can share them with. So we are completely alone in that sense, in bearing those sufferings and difficulties. And also upon death, everything will be left behind and you will not be able to have any company that will share your experience with you, that will proceed with you from this lifetime to the next. So we also die alone. We are born alone and die alone. And while we are alive, we might become attached to certain people in thinking that either we or them will think that I'll die for you or I'll give up everything that I have for you. But still, when we think of birth and death, we can recognize that we are born alone and die alone. We do not have any companionship for the experience of suffering. And also upon death, we will proceed completely alone. And therefore, rather than remaining attached to different things, then it is much better to become skilled in knowing what is to be taken up, virtuous actions, what needs to be cast aside, negative actions that will have a great effect over future lifetimes.
Just had a question with regards to when we're born alone and then we die alone. Could it also be seen that between those 2 points, we are alone because, as Geshe said, the objects of our attachment are unstable. There's constantly changing, and we're projecting onto them all the time. So my sense of me being with other people and not allowed to lose. If you understand what I'm saying. Even when we're around people, it seems like we're alone.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'll just repeat the question for the people at home. So it said up in Geshe saying that we are born alone and die alone. It seems that also in between, the period in between, we can think of ourselves also as being alone. With a sense of attachment, we project on certain things to other people, but still when we think of how those are not permanent and also are not stable, you can also say that also while we are alive, in between those 2 points, we are also alone. Is that what you said? Dila kewa chikpo dan chiwa kapsula yang chikpo seadi yang parula yang debe kapsula yang nga chikpo in sanlo peshetan yores kan sena kesi mission la yamana inya kola chakwa kewa ina ta chakwa yu di takpa tembo mesan peshe nga so debe kapsula yang chikpo in sena sanlo tan yorwes yamares kuchi
대단한 데비컬의 직부인 삼 디게 땅의 얘기를 디 펜도 가리에 따고 왔어라. 먼저 비게 상도 가르땅 바이네야. 상디 펜도 가리에 있다고 왔어라.
Yeah, you can also think that while you're alive, you're alone. But then still, when you think about it like that, you need to think, is that way of thinking, is it beneficial? We can develop certain ways of thinking, but we have to make sure that we use them in a beneficial way. So if you think that also while I'm alive, I'm alone, what's the benefit in thinking about it like that?
ina zo di kala ya bi ta chi chakba khorang gi ton brode mai ma so man chakshi je ni nami ni pu futu slavche so zo lo ta chi ani lo shem kala ya lo thar kala ya chi ani ni sa sa da ni pu futu di khorang ya chang chakshi khorang ton draj ma da bi chi bi 아니 개저 톨이야 아니 개와 침이 톨이야 상당 투비어 말아서 디기 아니 개와 침이야 드르 갑들이야 딘내겐 치고라 작든 듣변지 아니 에 가서 따지 책 메시지 담아 그 겐고 차르 갑들이야 따지 부부두 아니 사장기 아니 소수 치고 겐고 친 대고지 잠발라 따 되네 이 shum 대대고야지 that settle tarikala one jiglo jomber che sound dance jiwa so so be jigula wa ya sound dan so ji kibush de to yachi yungu dos kanji dindi reshes ra
Often in society, when we look at the family relationships that we have, we might get attached to our family members, to our siblings, to our partner, to our children, and so forth. And if we live a life in a way that is solely invested in those relationships, which are based on attachment, which then will, this type of attachment takes away from the time that we can put into our training in virtue that will be beneficial in terms of future lifetimes, then when the time of death will come, we will find that we have spent very little time in cultivating virtue that will be of benefit to the future. But also, sometimes what happens is that if you live the major part of your life when you're still capable of doing a good and powerful or effective practice, if you live that part of your life where you're completely engrossed with the attachment and clinging that you have to your family members, to your brothers and sisters, and to your children and so forth, and you will have spent very little time on doing an effective Dharma practice. It might be that when you get to the end of your life, when you're old, then you find that you haven't done enough. You find yourself maybe alone or isolated, whereas the time in which you were able to practice have already been spent. So then when we make sure that at a time in which we're still young and capable, we also use some of the time that we have at hand to practice the Dhamma. Geshe feels that when you get old, even if you find yourself in certain situations that you're alone or by yourself, you'll still have quite a lot to work with. You'll have many things that you can do on the mental level to keep your mind engaged.
then develop chabi yun da chongye yi dem medes da ne rangshin tem no sa power yi chi temper ki de rab to ko kishi da ne ba tan mambu johnson chaba da ne ba jon kyurkyan chi wi se ne ba da chabu chodan che de kan dun bebi to meto te chi wi se da jisu ndan kendos.
Now the commentary says, though one may attain these objects of desire, they are unreliable. One needs to generate stable conviction and realization that they will have to be given up naturally. Although one may receive a lot of gain as well as fame and pleasantness, this accumulation of gain and fame will have to be given up without freedom at the time of death. The meaning is that at the time of death, gain and fame will not follow one. That's all. Shall we leave the session here for now? Are you doing Tibetan or English? Sorry? English. All right, let's do Tibetan. All right. No, due to this virtue, might quickly become a Guru Buddha and lead all transmigrated beings without exception to that state. May the precious Supreme Bodhisattva not yet born arise. May that reason not decline but increase more and more. In this land encircled by snowy mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good, all powerful to resistance and Yaso, please remain with this samsara ends. You uphold the subduers more way, the sense of the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Mahajan's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplishes magnificent prayers, honoring the three jewels, protector of myself and others, your disciples, please live long. Geshe is hoping that if we recite things in English, we'll have a better chance of the Dharma entering into our mind. So, 저도 세숨 세디 거니.
Yeah.
근데 저도 세숨 거리.
자탁 세스. 자. 그냥 이게 이제 자탁 붙였어.
알아, 최선.
자탁.
오케이.
싸워서 세우지.
말해. 네 말해.
자탁 봐.
말해. 자톡 디 림도치로.
단도.
네.
단도 세스. 자티 데리.
그래서 딜라데 노트시나 메나디라양데 나 진짜 되어 있나로 데 자톡던데 담아 자톡스나 데 가라타 자 와수다 아니 따나로 똑같 쓸순데 지금서
자톡
자토 야마 저도 쓸순세디
되는 티
총같이
그래서 저 아니 자기 배시 세드스 당긴 도트레 도 이게 두거 딩게 두거 윈도 센터
오케이
도 자도 제가 드는 게 내냐
오케이
이게 디스트 디레지 자도 센스
오케이
승전의 문제
근데
야 네, 디스 리자게